thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. I thought I'd go a bit Christmassy this afternoon. I did wonder when this would happen. I'm notorious for starting my Christmas cards late, but I was looking through the items that Lisa was bringing onto the show on Thursday and Friday, and she was bringing on these layering stencils, so I thought it'd be a nice idea to perhaps show you an alternative use for them. They are a previous release, so they've been as part of Lisa's inventory for a while now, but it's always nice to show you different ways of using them. So I just wanted to create a bit of a Christmas spin on these, particularly the layering daisies. Both sets have 4 stencils in them. This card that I've used here, I've used 3 of the stencils, and there are various different ways you can use the stencils here, ranging from using just one of the stencils up to all 4 of them. It's a really nice way to create this polka dot effect using the traditional Christmas colours, and you can see here that I've really only used one stencil. I think it's the smallest size one, and all these circles are of the same size. So although they are layering circles and you can get a really lovely layered look, there are different ways to actually use them. So if I haven't actually stuck this down because I wanted to show you a few different alternatives. So if I put that one aside and I put this layer in, you can see here that I've actually used all of the stencils from the set, and that creates a completely different look. I also have another way of using those stencils. I think I just used 2 this time round, just the greens and the reds, the traditional colours, and that gives us another look altogether. And I think also what would be nice when you're showing you how to use these, particularly the layering dots, is that you can actually layer 2 completely different colours on top of one another. You've got to bear a few things in mind when you do that. Obviously the first layer that you put down, like you see the red in the background here, that has to be a little bit lighter to allow the green to sit on top of it, but it can be done. So don't always think that you need to go completely tone on tone like I did with this one. I just wanted to show you that, and that was the reason why I hadn't sort of built this card fully, because I just wanted to show you how you these different looks by swapping in these completely different backgrounds. I've used the ribbons and bows, and I've of course used the festive tatty words. I think what I'll do on this side, just a lot of this will just be not necessarily finishing off a card, but I will show you how these different backgrounds are made. So there'll be a lot of stenciling, so I just wanted to show you just different ways in which you can manipulate your stencils. Really, like all of other Lisa stencils, these are actually numbered, so there is a way, if you were to use all of them, there is the recommended order in which to use them. So we can, by doing that, you can see now that we have 4 different size circles. So what I can do to show you to start with, I'll show you how they layer. So I will use all 4 stencils and you can see the complete look. So obviously I'll be using the Ultimate and the peg system here. Now, because this is quite a regular and quite a geometric pattern, I do like to make sure it's lined up in a way that suits my eye. Everybody's different, and you may not be quite as bothered, but also because I've pre-cut the layer that I'm using, I haven't got the advantage of being able to place the die to choose the pattern. Now, if you were perhaps batch making, then it would be an idea to stencil this onto a large piece of card, and then you can die cut that out. So that, there are different ways of doing this. I'm just going to tape this down because you see here that we have partial circles on the layer in the background. For me, the way I want this to look, I don't want those partial circles to sort of appear in my pattern, mainly because it will cross over into the stitch detail, and I want that to be the edge of my design. So I'm just going to cover that over. So I'm going to mask off those circles, but also what that is doing is making sure also that my cardstock stays in place as well. Now I will be using Lisa's inks for these. I'm using the Strawberry Sundae and the Woodland Moss. I'm just going to go down with a little bit of red ink, and I'm going to do this really lightly because I will want to layer the green over the top of this later. It's not a problem because you can just cut yourself a new piece of card and restart, but sometimes that's not always, you don't always want to do that, particularly if you've got so far along in a project and you're perhaps you know, tight for time on some things. So I'm just going to lay that ink down. Now I'm not going to do all of this because the way that the card has been designed, I'm actually going to put in the layer over the top. So I really only need to do the top 3 rows there. So come in with stencil number 2. So this is where we can start introducing our green. And I am just going to come in and just work this up as gently as I did with the red. Now what this is going to do, by layering the colours red on green, it's actually going to give us quite a sort of a vintagey look, I think, a real vintage Christmas colours. And particularly because of the shades of the green and the red that we have with Lisa's inks at the moment, it just lends itself nicely to that. So it'd be lovely if you were teamed this with perhaps craft card or a cream card, and then some satin gold card from sort of Lisa's packs. That would look really nice. But if you, as you can see, just while I'm working away, just slowly go around, the green does actually start to become the prominent colour, even over a red, which is its complete opposite shade. I mean, not every colour would work by doing this, I don't think. Obviously it does come through trial and error, but you can see now that look sort of coming together. You can see how well the green is sitting on top of that red. Perhaps if you wanted a bit more of a bolder red with this, it might not work so well. You might need to go for perhaps a stronger green from a distressed shade, but it all depends. Or if you just want to go with the pure red look and layer the colours, you can do that also. Using your first stencil, stencil number 1, and not going too dark allows you to start building the layers on top and get this distinction between all the stencils that we'll come on to afterwards. So our last set now, this will allow us to go as heavy as we can. So you can use your blending brush here, or sometimes it's actually worth coming in with your little stencil brush because you can get a far more concentrated colour and build up those colours that way. And you can see, even though you're having to do them individually this time round, it is actually still quite quick. Don't want to waste that. There we are. So we can see that we have two-tone blending in the Christmas colours. And if we were to layer this onto our card, you can see that gives a lovely, I think that gives us a nice vintage effect. See, what I can show you also, just before we put this away, if we line up this last stencil again, so we're lining up those smaller dots, raise that up a little bit and then put that back onto the peg system there. Another way just to add a little bit of texture, perhaps just something a little bit different, is to bring in Lisa's twinkle pens. Now you need to give these a really good shake, a really good prime, because if you've got these sitting in your stash, then the mica will have settled. You will need to have a spare piece of card, because although you want to prime the nib, you don't want this nib completely flooded with colour where it's pooling away, because if we're going to run this through the stencil, if this ink was too wet, it would just run under the stencil and sort of bleed uncontrollably, which we don't want. So we need to make sure that there's no gapping really of the stencil to the card underneath. So all I do is just make sure I just hold this down and there's maximum sort contact between the stencil and the card there, and we just brush the twinkle pen through the stencil like that. Now the twinkle pen does wash off really nicely from the stencil, because I have done this once before and it cleaned up really nice. So, but it does give you just that little bit of sparkle in the background, a little bit of mica. It's ever so subtle. So if you want perhaps more of a bolder sparkle, then the glitter paste, if you have them, would be the perfect example, perfect medium to put through on that last layer. So that's one way to use the stencils. Now the next way, I want to show you how we created the small polka dot pattern, this one here. And it's really easy, really straightforward. So we have a clean page, and you can see now that I'm lining up the dots within that die cut there. Let me put that on the peg system, and those dots sit in there perfectly. Actually, it's almost made to measure, so that makes our job a lot easier. Now this time round, I'm actually only going to use the small stencil brushes, and I've put that down somewhere. There we are, and I'm going to start with the green. So we come in with our green, and again you can see just how quick that coverage is, even though you're just stenciling the dots individually. Now I shall only do 2 layers actually, because we've got a few to get through. Now the next thing we can do, we move our stencil across. Now there are different ways of doing this again, but I'm going to be going in a straight line as this one is here. So we line that up, and basically we put in the stencil between the 2 dots that we've already stenciled. So that's what our line, that's what our marker is, and it's quite easy to line up, and then you can put that back onto the peg system, and this is when we can come in with a second stencil brush and another colour, not the green stencil brush, back to the red. Okay, so yes, we're now coming in doing our alternating dots in our red, and you can see how the pattern is starting to build. Now before I carry on, I shall just wipe this again. Now it's entirely up to you at this stage. If you want to just sort of carry on and have such a, you know, a larger gap between the 2 lines, you'd be able to fill up this page in no time at all. But I think because of the size of the dots, it would be nice if we had another line in the centre there. So we can again easily see, because of the mylar, we can see our stenciling that we've done already. So we can just line up our dots, but just offset them just slightly diagonally. So we're creating a bit of a pattern there, and then we can pop that back into our peg system there, and then we can again come in and stencil. And again, this is the beauty actually of having these smaller brushes to work with. They give us that level of detail to create these patterns like this. So I've just moved that across again in the same line as the green that I've just done, and if I come in with the red, we can build up that pattern. So hopefully, I don't know if you'd have perhaps thought of doing this, but once you've either seen somebody do this or given it a go yourself, it sort of opens up your imagination, and there's all sorts of different combinations of colours that you can do, and patterns. You can perhaps put them closer together, but I just think that is just really pretty. And if you just were able to sort of go on and carry that down the whole page, I think that's just really effective, and just looks like it looks like a nice backing paper, doesn't it? So that's another way to use your stencils. Alternatively, I mean, I've used the smallest spots. You could use the larger ones. That's entirely up to you. Now this time what I wanted to show you is just how we line it up so we can create these spots on the diagonal. And it's not a massive change, but it's just subtle enough just to make it look a little different. So this time I'm using the grid work that's on the matte here. So I'm trying to get this sort of, these cross lines as central as I can, and I'm doing it all by eye. There's no need necessarily to get the ruler out. So it looks that if these lines were drawn, that would be about centre. So in doing that, what that enables me to do is to line up the corners of the stencil. Let's use the stencil number 2 for this one. Yes, I'll line up the diagonal corners to the lines there, these central lines, and that will give me a pretty good indication that is sitting sort of on the diagonal. So what I do, I now pick up the pieces together, and you notice that when I pick this up, I hold the stencil and the piece of card together, and generally it stays in place, and then I can pop that onto the peg system up there, and that's pretty much lined up, I would say. Now we do have some corners poking out. What again I would suggest doing is just popping a little bit of tape there, and this will serve two purposes. For one, it will keep your card into place without having to use magnets, but also if your brush does stray off a little bit, it does mean that your corners won't get coloured, which could look a little bit odd, because this one up here won't. And just make sure that sits underneath the stencil but not poking out into where the dots are there. So hopefully that makes sense, and I think it's definitely worth being able to sort of bear that in mind, especially with these square stencils and the geometric ones like this. It just offers a bit of an alternative, really. I'm using a slightly smaller brush here, mainly because my larger one there has still got the green on it, so I didn't want that to contaminate. So I'll only do so much of this. I don't need to go all the way along, because I say by the time I've put the banner along the bottom here, you won't see the bottom part of that. And like with all the blending that we do, the more that you go round and round, it actually smooths out your blend. So if you do get any sort of areas where you think the ink has gone on a bit unevenly, do bear with it. Just have patience, go round and round and round, and it does blend out to be a beautifully smooth colour. Now I'm not pressing particularly hard on this. It's more of the sort of the consistent motion going along which actually does the job, as opposed to really pressing hard for you. So I can remove that. That was stencil number 2. So I can come in with stencil 3, and I will layer up. Now I haven't cleaned the green off of this, but the red will have a slight green tone, but I don't think that that's too much of a problem. So I'll just get this one finished, and then hopefully I can get on and perhaps show you quickly the layering daisies, just to show you that you don't need to use every layer of those stencils to create the effect. Now this time I'm just going to come in quickly with a stencil brush, because that gives us that concentrated colour, and I won't do it all. I just want you to get the idea of what's going on, although it does actually blend quite quick. So there's the red layered dot off the diagonal. You can see that the layout is slightly different to, let me show you this one here. That would be when the stencils are sitting square, and this is where the stencils are sitting at a diagonal. So let's say the look is subtle, but I think it's one that's worth remembering sometimes, just to give that a go. So then you can layer that on there, and then that gives us another look. Now obviously I didn't do all the outside as neatly or as well as I could have done that time. Do I have a new piece of card? Yes, and I'll just show you quickly the layering of the daisies. So again, this set has 4 stencils. Okay, so we have the 4 stencils, and the stencil number 1, which is the biggest of the concentric shapes. Now this does actually look like a flower, so I would possibly leave this one aside if you wanted to create a snowflake effect, because I think that is the one that looks more floral. But when you start going down to layer number 2, stencil number 2, you can see the shape changes completely, and I think this is definitely more snowflake like. So let's get stenciling on there, and you can actually appreciate then where I'm coming from with this. Now the card that I did create, as you can see there, this is where I actually laid the stencils on the diagonal, so that gave that a really nice look. Now I shall come in with the deep ocean, and again I think I'll just go really light with the blue initially, just a really pale layer, because remember we have a further 2 layers to add on top of this, and where the colour will get progressively darker. So you want to make sure that you have it somewhere to go with the ink, basically. So I won't do all of it again. And if I take that away, you can see how this can actually be built into a festive look, I think. As I say, especially when you start layering snowflakes on top of on your project, I think you can definitely get away with this being a festive stencil. And we always want our stencils and all the items that we buy to be multifunctional, really, don't we? We want them to do as many jobs as they can, and I think it's always a nice way to actually see somebody use something in a slightly different way that perhaps you wouldn't have thought of, and that is building really lovely. Now our final one here would be amazing if we had a silver glitter paste to put into that. That would just finish that off, I think, really lovely. I don't have that myself, so I will find a clean stencil brush, and I just want to come in with the darkest that I can, so we have that centre look. Now what you could do if you don't have the glitter pastes, what might be a nice idea is just put a little swipe of glue into there. Let's just do that if I can. Now here we are, I'm going completely off piece now. So you might want to use a little spreader for this, and not necessarily your finger, but you can just put perhaps just a little spread of glue, and make sure you that you clean your stencil pretty quickly afterwards. So we have a little dab of glue in the centre there. Let's get myself another piece of card. And then what you can do, if you have some glitter, now I'm hoping this will work, I haven't even tried this. You can sprinkle some glitter on there while the glue is wet. Oh yeah, that works, look. And you have yourself a little sparkly snowflake. So that's definitely worth doing, I think. Although I would say that if you were using glue on your stencil, you'd want to get that into soapy water pretty quick afterwards. But that works really well, I think. Now there is another way. When I was just playing before, you can see the gaps in between these areas here. What you can do, you can start linking these up just by moving your stencil a little bit again. You can see that I'm actually catching the tips of all these elements that I've already stenciled. I'm catching them within the apertures of the stencil that's already sitting there, if that makes sense. Now what you can do, you can either hold the stencil like that, or you can move this then up onto the peg system, which if it's there you might as well make the use of. But by doing that and coming in, just by using a little bit of the ink that is just left on the brush, I mean, you can go as bold as you want to, but I don't think this needs to be as bold as what we've already stenciled. If you take that away, you've actually started creating a whole new pattern again in between. I think that's a really lovely effect. Now, whether you consider that to be Christmassy or not, I don't know, but it's just a really nice way to use the stencil, I think. If you wanted to add the layers in between them also, then that'd be entirely up to you, but I think it's just quite nice just to have them sitting as like shadows in the background. So many different uses to these stencils. I mean, they aren't just as they appear on Lisa's packaging, which gives you the basis of what they look like, but if she were to put all the different combinations on there, you know, we'd be ending up with a book. But just play with a bit of card and a bit of ink and a brush and different colours. I mean, wouldn't this look fantastic in pinks? Also, if pinks and turquoises for Christmas, I think that's a really popular and a really nice bright colour combination as well. Hopefully I've given you a few ideas here. I know I've jumped sort of backwards and forwards a little bit, and I've not necessarily come up with a particular project for you. But there'll be many of you who've already got these stencils in your stash. So it will be perhaps a nice way for you to revisit them and just so thanks so much again for joining me this afternoon, and I shall see you again next week. Thanks everyone.